Welcome everyone to Haven of Horror. As always, I am Subject. We have Robert Buffalo Wild with us and Noah Clarice uh, Torgo. How's it going, guys?
Does that make you Hannibal
going
Lecter?
good.
Yes,
Of course, he saved the best character for himself.
of course.
I'm just glad I don't have to be Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, Robert, do
Oh,
you have something you need to tell us?
Yes, but I mean, you are the one with the thing for Clarice, so.
That's in the next movie. That one doesn't count.
It's blood. You drew a pretty interesting photo of her portrait.
So if you haven't figured it out yet, by the thumbnail, the title, or the talking, we're talking about Silence of the Lambs. Side note, the only Arrow release that I've seen with a slipcover
Interesting.
on the like on these like thick box releases that they do. So this was Robert's pick because he picked the 90s because of course he did. What made you pick this?
It's one of my favorites. It's a great movie. I feel like the '90s is a decade that gets kind of a bad rap when it comes out. In some ways, rightfully so, because
Slow.
post Scream, you get a lot of those Scream knockoffs, and the first half's because they're kind of dead. But a lot of my favorites actually come from this decade, and I think there's a lot of strong stuff here. You get Exorcist 3, this,
Yes.
The Sixth Sense, a whole, and Scream, which is one of my favorites. So even though that spawned a bunch of knockoffs, you do get, I think, quite a variety of some really good horror movies. Candyman, that's another one.
The first half is stronger than the second half of the decade.
That's probably true, but like I said, there's a lot of stuff there I like. But the '80s, you just get so much excess. And the '70s, you get a lot of like the really classic psychological stuff. But the '90s got some good stuff. And it's like this, Candyman, and Exorcist 3 all have kind of a similar vibe that just really speaks to me. They all have that investigation aspect. They're all very gritty. Even though Candyman is and Exorcist 3 are more supernatural, there's just a very similar feel to these movies that I really gravitate to. And this is another one of those that is kind of early for me, where I see this as a teenager when I'm like getting into this genre. Like, okay, I want to see like the hardcore, like the really good stuff, and this is one of the first ones I get to. So I do have a long history with this movie. And
see, that was your mistake. You never start with the good stuff. You start with the bad stuff, so you appreciate the good stuff when you get to it, and then you develop a love for that bad stuff. That's like a toxic relationship. Anyway, no, I'm glad you picked this because I mean, obviously, I wanted to cover this, and it's a big one. Like I said, this is the Arrow 4K. It looks like you've got the Blu-ray.
I do. I have the Criterion Blu-ray.
Oh, okay. I don't know why they changed the cover. It's weird. I like this cover better.
Yeah, well, Criterion usually has their own original.
True.
But I think this one's really.
I don't remember when I first see this. All I know is that I had a phase in my teens when I saw this. And I read all the books. I saw all the movies. So I've forgotten more about this franchise than probably either of you know. And that's not a flex. I've legitimately forgotten most of it.
Okay.
Noah, how do you come to this franchise?
I mean, it's always one of the movies that's talked about as like one of the like great classic horror movies that isn't really seen as a horror movie, at least when it comes out. I think this is labeled as a thriller, or a lot of people label this more as a thriller.
Yeah, so that they can justify giving it the Oscar noms.
Yeah. But you look at this movie, it is a horror movie through and through, especially kind of near the middle where you get the scenes of Hannibal like going crazy and killing a bunch of people. Like that breakout scene is great.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of thrillers. You don't usually see that type of scene in something like Heat. You know what I mean?
No.
Like that's when you're like, this is a horror movie. Come on.
No, it's absolutely a horror movie, but it kind of goes into that subgenre, kind of what Robert mentioned, like Exorcist 3. I would also say 7,
Yes.
where it's like a detective horror hybrid, and I really like that vibe as well. I love those movies. But I didn't come to this until I always wanted to watch it, but it's one of those movies that everyone's like, "Oh, Silence of the Lambs, you got to see it." But I never actually ended up watching it until a few years ago. I think one of the last few Halloweens, I just ended up watching it. Like, I might as well check it out finally.
Well, that makes sense. No, the more people tell you, "Oh, this is good, you should watch it," the more you're like, "No, go watch something else instead."
Listen, there's a lot of stuff to watch.
Friday the 13th Part 5 isn't going to watch itself. Silence of the Lambs can wait.
I mean, I'd rather watch Friday. No, no, I think it is absolutely embarrassing, and I'm just still holding this because I didn't want to put it down, so that's why it's still a bit shot. It's embarrassing that we had to like change genres for this for it to become an Oscar nom, and just further proves that Oscars are bullshit.
Yes, definitely a bias against horror, and I believe the only like horror film to win Best Picture, as well as a ton of other awards for lead actor, lead actress, and other stuff. But if this movie comes out today, it gets the elevated horror label. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we just hadn't come up with that term yet in the 90s, but that's what we'd call it now, which is stupid because like at The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, or what, we've always made horror movies like this that blend other genres or are more sophisticated.
I know you guys like this movie more than me, but we did just remake this movie. It was called Long Legs.
I think that's kind of a stretch, but there are similarities.
Kind of. There's definitely similarities, but that's more supernatural.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I didn't know this growing up, but this is not the first Hannibal Lecter movie, but it's the one that everybody knows. And I found this out. William Friedkin almost played Hannibal in that movie.
William Friedkin, the director?
The Exorcist director.
Really?
Yeah, he was on the list of names.
Weird.
Okay, I didn't know he did any acting.
I didn't either.
That's really bizarre.
Yeah, but obviously then this comes out 1990 or 91, I guess it says here. What's interesting is this isn't a movie that takes a minute to get going. It starts and it doesn't stop.
It throws you right in. You immediately know everything you need to know about Clarice and all the main characters and what's going on with Buffalo Bill. Although it's an interesting setup because at first they put her on watch for Hannibal Lecter, but it is really just because it's part of the Buffalo Bill case and they want her to keep an eye on him because he knows a lot about Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, and I haven't seen a lot with Jodie Foster. I feel like she's just not typically in things that I seek out. And this has to be an early role for her. She's great, like from scene one.
Well, and she'd been acting for a while before this too. She was a child actor. And she successfully made the transition to adult actor. And yeah, she's great in this. I don't think there's a weak performance in this movie, especially from the main cast.
I mean, obviously the standouts, Roger Corman, we can all agree. He just blows everyone else away.
I had a double take when I rewatched this, and I saw the name Roger Corman come up. I'm like, oh, okay.
But no, this is actually considered kind of a risk for Jodie Foster because, like you said, she was a child actress. She's a Taxi Driver. That's a big one in the 70s. And this was coming off of one of her Oscar wins. So people were like, oh, why do you want to do like a sleazy, gross, exploitive horror movie? And she's like, I read the book and I want to do it. Like, because I like this character and I like this story. And it worked clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, of course,
protagonist, a great hero.
Of course, one of the greatest villain castings of all time, to the point of, I remember when they announced the show, I was like, what's the point? Like, you're not going to outdo Silence of the Lambs.
Hopkins.
I was wrong. I was wrong, by the way. When I finally watched that show, he might be my favorite Hannibal Lecter, but it's a toss-up. They're doing different things.
Ooh.
Is Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, who I always forget how little is in this movie. And I want to say he's used effectively, but I do think he kind of gets lost in the shuffle in that third act when she's at the killer's house. Like, it's like, oh, he's done now. Like, we got to focus on this. I wish he kind of would have been more connected to everything.
That's never really bothered me. I like that he's just gone and out, and then you get at the very end that little catch up with him. That's part of what's interesting about this is in terms of cultural osmosis, you go into this movie thinking, "Oh, this is the Hannibal Lecter movie. He's the thing that's remembered from this." And yeah, he's not in it very much. He's already behind bars when we meet him. The real villain of this movie is Buffalo Bill, who I never even heard of before I watched this movie for the first time, and he's great. I'd argue underrated because he's very creepy and distinct and unsettling. Who played him? I think it was Ted Levine.
Yeah.
Like he's wonderful, and I think much scarier than Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter is just cool and captivating, and every time he's on screen, you just.
But I'd argue that's what makes Hannibal scary. It's that he's not scary. He draws you in.
Yeah.
Whereas
He's
you're almost repulsed by Buffalo Bill because of how sleazy and weird he is.
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
far more dangerous
Also,
to have the alluring villain.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say I feel like if you're looking at this purely as a standalone piece, which in many ways you should, I can see you saying, "Oh, I want more of him," or he feels kind of lost in the shuffle in the third act. It's hard for me to divorce this from the series because, of course, Anthony Hopkins would play this character 2 more times, to varying degrees of quality, but still, and in the context of the books, this was the second book. A third one would eventually be written. So I see it as part of just like this long ongoing story. So that never really bothered me.
It will always baffle me that we went 2, then 3, and then went back to the first one.
Yeah, well, because the original, as you alluded to earlier, was based on the first book, which is Red Dragon, adapted in the '80s by Malcolm Mann as Manhunter, and
Wasn't it
for
Michael
a
Mann?
yeah,
Yeah,
and
Michael Mann.
I love that movie. You mentioned Longlegs earlier, and how everyone's saying, "Oh, it's like Silence of the Lambs," and in many ways, it's similar. It's obviously set in the '90s. It's paying homage to that. I would argue that Manhunter is much more stylistically and pacing wise in tune with something like Longlegs than this film is, because that's a very atmospheric, slow, methodical movie. Very underrated, very good. Brian Cox played Hannibal Lecter. And
Really want to see it. And the CSI guy is Will Graham.
Yeah, William Peterson, and he's wonderful. That movie is great. It's very 80s, and I love it. But of course, Dino De Laurentiis' production bombed at the box office. Nobody saw it, so they sold the rights. So that's why when they got to the second book, a different studio made it. It was like, we'll just ignore the first one. We're just adapting this as its own movie. But then for many years, Manhunter would be resold and repackaged on VHS as like the prequel to Silence of the Lambs, as it was always intended. So I wonder if that's just why they dragged their feet on remaking Red Dragon. Was like, well, that movie already kind of exists, and then at some point they thought, well, let's just make it with Anthony Hopkins. Like maybe
this time we can do it with the iconic Hannibal Lecter,
which I do remember liking that book. One of the things that because book wise, I much prefer Red Dragon because I find Will Graham's relationship with Hannibal much more interesting because he knows him from before he's a cannibal, or not before he's cannibal, before he's caught.
Right.
Okay. And the show, spends 3 seasons developing that, and it's great. But yeah, so and it's almost a trope now, but this is the criminal helping a police officer with a case. But like, what are his true intentions? Yeah. And I don't think you ever know. Even at the end of the movie, I don't think I know what his intentions were at the end. Was it just to escape? Did he have something else in mind?
Well, he wanted to have a friend for dinner.
That's true.
That's true.
I think he wants to escape. I think that's always his goal. Like, there's a scene when he's telling Clarice all his list of demands. Like, that's obviously all bullshit. He's just planning on escaping. But I think his respect and infatuation with Clarice, I think that is genuine and grows over the course of the story. So at the very end, when he tells her, like, I'm going to leave you alone. You don't need to worry about me. I'm going to do my own thing. I think he means it. Like, he does not have any negative intentions.
No, I buy there's a respect. And that's tricky too, because you said, as a series, and I haven't seen the third one in a long time, but I do remember the ending, which is completely different and insane.
Yes.
So does that kind of inform your view of this dynamic, like because you know where they're going in the films?
maybe to a point. I'm also just going off of like my first impressions of this movie before I saw the rest of it. And for context, I've just seen the movies. Well, except for Hannibal Rising, I still haven't seen that one. By all accounts, it's terrible, but I haven't watched it.
I will
You might
stick
be
up
the
for
only
that
one.
movie. I haven't seen it in 15 years, but as a kid, I loved it.
Okay, I haven't seen it, and I haven't seen the TV show yet, which everyone says is fantastic. It's great. And I haven't read the books, but I've seen most of the movies. So I don't know. Even just like on my first impressions of this movie years ago, I was like, oh no, I think he cares about Clarice to some extent.
I don't know if it's to
then,
the extent that the next movie will go to, but
So the next movie goes really far with that. Not to get into that movie too much.
not as much as the book.
Okay.
so
this
slight
is the only-
spoilers. So slight spoilers
Okay.
for Hannibal if anybody cares. In the movie, they become lovers in the third one.
Oh no.
Well, no, not. I think you got it backwards.
I think you have it
And-
backwards because I just looked at this earlier.
No, in the book Hannibal, they're lovers by the end of it. She kind of goes bad, but in the movie, they take that. No, they don't actually hook up in the movie.
Okay. I don't know how.
Hold
I feel
on,
about
I'm
that.
looking at this.
No, it was extremely controversial, and not to, now we're getting very sidetracked, but it's why Jodie Foster turns it down and ends up being Julianne Moore because
Okay.
she knew about what they did in the book and read the script. It was like, oh god, this is awful. I'm not doing
Oh,
it.
you're
And
right.
then by
I
the
did
time
have
they-
it switched in my head.
Okay.
Okay, the
But
movie
by the
ending might
time
be
they
better.
made the movie, it's a little better. But by the time they made the movie, they changed the ending anyway. 'Cause-
Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry. What were you
back to
saying?
this movie. No, I forgot what my point was going to be, to be honest.
Well,
Real quick, I
that's-
want to bring up, sorry, real quick, because I'll forget, and I don't want to pull up my notepad because it'll mess up my computer. So I will never complain about the Kurtzman Clarice show, because in my research for this, I found out we almost got the Lifetime version of that. Apparently,
Oh,
Lifetime wanted to
true.
make a Clarice show, like years
Oh,
ago.
literally. Okay.
Okay, I
That's
don't know why this
dodgeable
is,
there.
but this is a property where there's some bullshit complications with the rights. So, all I know about the Clarice show is that they had access to the Clarice character, but not Hannibal Lecter. So they
Yeah.
couldn't reference
Okay.
that overtly.
So-
it's a mess.
So because this is just going to be about this whole franchise now, the show runs into that too, because season 3 is Red Dragon, but I know they have to change some stuff, and like they wanted to get to Silence of the Lambs, but there was a rights battle for that.
Mhm.
And then in season 2, they set up some of the stuff from Hannibal, like Mason Verger, and his sister, who is played by Gibbs from Freddy vs. Jason. It was hilarious. It's the first thing I'd seen her in since Freddy vs. Jason.
Nice.
Um,
But also what I find interesting about this movie is like when it comes out, it gets good reviews, but there are some critics who didn't like it, and there are some people who said like, oh, this movie like it's too over the top, it's too heightened, which I find really funny knowing what comes after with the other movies because this is so subtle compared to those. But for me, it strikes that balance, and it's just my jam. Where it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
like Hannibal Lecter, he's locked up in a dungeon. It's very stylistic. It's very like, no mental institution actually looks like this, but I don't care. Buffalo Bill has this gigantic lair um, with his basement and everything, and it's awesome. Like it strikes that balance of feeling very gritty, very realistic, but still being able to go to those heightened places. That's part
the
of what
thing
makes it
that
stand
the
out
thing
for me.
that bothered me, and not like in a bad way, it's just like nobody on the set thought about this, is the fact that all of them apparently have open bar cells, so they can just fling shit at people.
Oh god, this is so gross. What happens at the beginning?
I would have just left.
Yeah, like I'm done.
Absolutely not.
Well, what's
N-
funny is Hannibal's cell was also almost with bars, but then the
Mhm.
director said, "This is really annoying and difficult to shoot around because we're missing too much of the performances from them with these fucking bars in front of the camera." So then they said, "Well, let's do the plexiglass so the actors can be in full frame." And I feel like they kept it to just Hannibal to stand out from the others. Like, no, he's the most dangerous one. Like, he needs the special cell. I think cinematically it works really well, but like you said, like, it is funny with what the arguably more deranged, out of control inmates are able to get away with
Yeah.
in the type of cells
Yeah.
that they're in.
That also kind of goes into how a lot of the conversation scenes are shot from like Clarice's POV. So there's like a lot of scenes where she'll be talking to someone and it'll cut back and forth, and it's like extreme close up of someone's face, like right in her face, talking to her. So yeah, I just really liked how a lot of the shots were framed, and it does a good job of putting you in her shoes, where it's like she's a woman in this traditionally like masculine institution, and a lot of that stuff isn't really spelled out in dialogue. It's just it does a good job of like making you feel like that through the like cinematography, rather than having to spell out that theme through conversations.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because as I was looking, I do a lot of research. Mostly it was just me like reading through the Wikipedia production and stuff like that scenes, because I didn't have time to do a lot of research. That is a big controversy with this film, is its use of gender and sexuality, especially with Buffalo Bill, who leans more into the transsexual side of things, which I am not remotely qualified to talk about, because I am neither. I am not an expert. But like, can we just let villains be villains? Like,
well, that is something they were conscious of while they were making the movie, and I don't know if this is in the book or not, but there is a scene where Hannibal Lecter says, like, no, this Buffalo Bill guy, he's not a real transsexual. He thinks he is, he wants to be, but it's another phase he's in, because he's someone who's tries something and gets obsessed with stuff, and like this is just the next thing he's trying. Like, he's not a real transsexual. And Clarice says, like, typically transsexual people are very passive. They're not known for violence, contrary to popular belief. So like, no, this movie was controversial when it came out, but that is stuff they were conscious of when they were making it. And even Buffalo Bill himself was often misinterpreted as being homosexual, which was not the case. It's actually the opposite.
No,
where they're like, no, this guy's very fucked up, and in some ways is trying to mock other people with his behavior. That may not all be clear in the movie, but even like in his basement, in his rooms, if you're looking in the background, like he has like swastikas, he has other stuff.
Yeah,
where it's like, this is a guy who just tries things, but the intention was him to not be a gay villain.
That was something I didn't pick up on, and I picked up on in this viewing. Like, there's swastikas in the background. It's like, this is a very strange character. Like, I can't really get a read on what he wants, other than like he's frustrated with who he is, and he wants to change, and he wants to. That's where the whole like butterfly like cocoon thing comes from.
I'm kind of an idiot. I just realized those are butterflies, like on the posters and shit. I thought they were moths.
Or like moths,
or a moth.
I think it's the same thing. Yeah, or not same thing, but same thematic relevance.
Because he's putting moths in like people's bodies. I think they do say it's moths, but
also, just for some behind the scenes info, every time you see a photo, or we're in that morgue scene where you actually see one of the female victims, because the movie has a lot of restraint for that type of violence. We don't glorify that much, but when you do see it, it's very fucked up. Those are not dummies. Those are actresses in makeup, and like in that morgue scene, like, no, she's just laying still and is shooting that scene naked with all this makeup on her, and like when they pull the thing out of her mouth, they said that was made of like a type of candy. It was like a gummy worm or something, just in case she swallowed it. So like, that's a real actress.
They should have used a real
they
bug.
wanted it to be real. Oh fuck. Yeah. Oh, it's so gross.
Don't move or you'll swallow a bug.
That's funny because it's candy, because it did look really disgusting. So they did a good job of making it not look edible.
And we should mention that despite, some mixed critical reception, which all mixed ones that I read were mostly focused around, like I mentioned, this movie's like themes of sexuality and transsexual people. This made almost $300 million on a $20 million budget. Like, this was a huge movie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it gave us one of the most iconic, like, killer shots of all time, him with that mask.
Mhm.
Yep.
which has also been done to death at this point.
It's also a very
Yeah,
quotable
and-
movie too. Like a lot of stuff Hannibal says has been quoted and referenced in other stuff, like the five of beans line.
That
Did you
one's
just say
iconic.
Five Bean line?
Five.
Yeah.
It's
Isn't that what he
Fava
says?
Bean.
Or
Fava
fava, whatever. Fiva.
My
Uh,
favorite kind of bean, the Fiva one.
You can tell that I've eaten five of beans.
If it wasn't clear, this is the type of movie you should watch before watching this review because we are all over the place.
Yes. Do not
But,
come here without having watched the film. You will not be able to gauge whether you like the film or not. This is, I label these reviews, but they're more discussions.
Yeah. Now, my favorite line though is after they discover the severed head from who's a victim connected to Buffalo Bill, and what was a patient of Hannibal Lecter, and Hannibal Lecter says it was the best thing that happened for him. Really, his therapy was going nowhere. The way he delivers his lines is so good, and just in that cell, he's so intimidating.
He's also such an interesting character, even though the movie doesn't reveal a whole lot about him.
Mhm.
But you know that he used to be a psychiatrist, and then he's a cannibal, and he gets caught, and that's all you know. But through his conversation scenes with Clarice, you can tell that he's very perceptive, and he can immediately read people. So, yeah, he's just a really fascinatingly written character. And it's a case of a character that I'd like to see in like prequels expanded upon, but I'm also fine with this being the only thing if this was a more like standalone movie. And Hopkins plays him brilliantly too.
As that for sure. And as for something like Manhunter or Red Dragon, like that's not an origin for him. It's just, oh, this is how he got caught. This is the guy who caught him.
Mm-hmm.
You get enough, and then by the time you get to
Hannibal Rising is the origin.
Which I've not seen, but I know they do stupid stuff like here's the origin of the mask.
No.
And it's a mask that looks kind of like that mask, but it's Hannibal Lecter, so we got to put that on the poster. Like I know it does some stupid shit like that.
But I will say the origin of how he becomes a cannibal is a really just tragic, fascinating idea.
Yeah, for sure.
I will tell you guys later if you want to be told, but
it's something I'm open to seeing. But also, if this was the only thing I'd ever seen Hannibal Lecter in, I'd be fine with it.
Yeah, and Red Dragon's good. You just have to go in knowing, like, yeah, it's 15 years later. He's obviously a lot older, but it's fine.
Yeah, I'll give it that.
Yeah, and it's got a good cast. That's Ed Norton, right?
Yeah, Ed Norton, who's very good as Will Graham. I think I prefer William Peterson because they're doing very different things, but they're both great. And I've heard that the guy on the show is great.
He's my favorite take, but you do get a lot more. Because, like I said, Red Dragon isn't even until like season 3, so you get a lot of time with their friendship and everything.
Yeah. So some fun facts about the actors. I mean, we get a few returning over the next couple of movies, but Barney, the guy his main guard who works at the institution, he's actually in Manhunter, but as a different character. He's like a cop or something in that movie, and then he comes back for the next two as Barney. So I think that actor is technically in more Hannibal Lecter movies than anyone else.
Than Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, so
No,
that's fun.
not.
And there's someone else. And obviously Clarice's boss, Jack Crawford. A lot of people in our circles, because that's Scott Glenn. We know him as Stick from the Daredevil show, and he's awesome. He's a great actor. He's in tons of stuff.
I'm gonna one up you though,
he's great in this movie
because I didn't notice him, but I'm reading here. Guess who has an uncredited cameo as one of the jailers?
I think looking, is it George Romero?
It is.
Yeah, I remember George Romero.
That's awesome.
Had a random cameo in it, but that's fun.
I didn't spot him. The next time I watch this movie, I'm gonna watch out for him.
Yeah, I'm gonna look for him next time.
So really, the only thing I have to talk about, just because like this is a good story, but I don't have a lot of thoughts on the story. Just that I like. This is a movie that I watch and I like how it unfolds. But thematically, I don't have a lot of stuff that we haven't already talked about. But I do want to talk about the night vision scene because that stresses me the fuck out.
Oh yeah,
That's the scariest scene in the movie.
that's the most intense part, probably.
It is a stroke of brilliance.
Mhm. And before that scene, we get probably one of the other famous scenes from this movie that's like required viewing if you go to film school or taking an editing class is the iconic cross-cutting scene where we see the FBI
Yes.
storming a building and uh,
Mhm.
Clarice going to see Buffalo Bill, but she doesn't know it's Buffalo Bill yet, and you think they're in different places, but oh no, the FBI, they're in the wrong house, and she's talking to him, and it's a perfect reveal. Do you remember if that was something that was spoiled for you, or do you remember like if that
That
reveal caught
wasn't
you off
spoiled
guard?
for me, and that was something I didn't predict when I first watched it. So
And it's hard.
when it was revealed, I was like, "Oh, okay, cool."
And the problem is, it's now been copied so many times in other movies
Yeah.
and shows that like it's a trope now.
Right.
So it's easier to catch that stuff. But at the time, like that is brilliant. And then we get her showdown with Buffalo Bill. He shuts out all the lights. He has the night vision goggles. She can't see him. And oh
Yeah.
god, again, it does that POV thing. We're now in his POV observing
Yeah.
her, and it's so creepy and unsettling.
It's so
It's
creepy.
great stuff.
Yeah, and the night vision goggles were set up earlier because he
Yes.
uses them to when he kidnaps the senator's daughter. So it's like, all right, they paid that off too.
Yeah, this movie does a lot with POV, whether we're following Clarice or Bill or Hannibal. Like we're almost always in one of their shoes, like from their literal first person perspective, where it's like, oh, now we're in this character's head. So with Clarice, rather in her head, or we're someone observing her. So
Yeah.
it's this very intimate, claustrophobic kind of movie. And like you said, with her being an underdog, I think that's why I find Clarice endearing and cool, and one of my favorite protagonists. I can understand finding Will Graham more interesting because he's a lot more complex and damaged, and he has more of a fleshed out backstory. Clarice is more of like the audience stand-in. Like this is her first adventure. She's coming into this world. We're seeing it through her eyes. So they're feeling very different with the stories that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
But I like Clarice.
She's great.
And how,
If I could count her as a final girl, she'd be one of my favorite like horror protagonists.
yeah, for sure. It's a situation where I don't think she fits the final girl
She
label, but
doesn't.
certainly protagonist.
It's tricky because it's not a slasher movie.
Yeah, and sometimes you can be both. Like you have Ash Williams, where in Evil Dead and in Evil Dead 2, to an extent, like he's the final boy. But by the time he gets in Army of Darkness, like he's not the final boy in that; he's just the hero. So it depends on the movie. Yeah, exactly.
Although I say that this isn't a slasher. The scene where Hannibal breaks out is pretty slasher-esque.
Yeah.
And that's maybe
great.
one of my favorite
scenes.
Oh,
the face bite.
So good.
Yeah.
We never really see him eat anybody in this movie, but that's the closest.
No.
No, and I have this weird thing with the other stuff in this franchise where it'll just be like food, but they're saying it's human food, like human meat. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just seeing food. Like I'm hungry now.
You're like, oh, that looks tasty. No, but I do appreciate the restraints that the movie has, like because it's going for a darker tone than most slasher movies. It's not like reveling in the gore, so in a way, it's more effective when it's not like showing every graphic detail of it.
Well, and it also depends on the character you're looking at, because with Bill, all of his victims, all those kills are off screen. We're just told about them and see some photos, and of course we get the morgue scene. And his final victim ends up being rescued. So we never get to see him enact the horror, enact the violence, really. So we never get to revel in that. But with Hannibal Lecter, we get a pass to revel that because he's cool, and the movie wants you to like him.
And the movie does want you to like him, but it's like what John was saying earlier, that is kind of what makes him scary. So it's like you feel both. It's like, I like you, you're charismatic, but you're also horrifying. So I don't know how to feel.
Well, and Red Dragon really cements this home as he was almost a celebrity.
Yes.
And Red Dragon, like in the movie, he's hosting like dinners and like he keeps high company because people liked him. He wasn't like Buffalo Bill, where he was some weirdo, that people are like, oh, he's just a loony psychologist. No, like, he was successful. He was charismatic. Um, he was famous almost. And then he gets caught as a cannibal.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
Everybody has their flaws.
And that's, again, I think part of why this movie resonates with me so much is I am a sucker for a good prison escape movie that you don't know is a prison escape movie while you're watching it. So when that turn happens and he gets out, it's so exciting and comes out of left field. And that's, again, one of my favorite reveals ever of how he swaps clothing with the one cop and takes his face and the way he stages all that.
Robert, can I
so good.
Can I just say something that may ruin it? All I could think about was Halloween H2O and Resurrection, because it's the exact same twist. Do you remember that?
No, but this does that better. Come on.
Just with a face instead of a mask.
At least this isn't stupid. And this came before that.
That's another thing that I somehow didn't predict when I first watched that. And the shot of the guy like on the phone, and then you just see him behind him, and he rips the face
he does
off.
the Michael Myers setup,
and then it just cuts right there. It's so
the Halloween movies are looking at that scene specifically, and I thought they get out of the ending of H2O. It's amazing.
Maybe.
Well, this did it better.
All right, we have been at this for about 40 minutes, and we do have other stuff that we need to do tonight. So, Robert, I'm going to ask you final thoughts or anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, I love this movie. It's great. I love the music, and like I said, I like Clarice's arc a lot. And her, she represents innocence. She's not a damaged character at the start. She's just in a tough situation, trying to prove herself to the FBI, and everything with her backstory tracks with this. I guess, if we're gonna explain the title, it's this lamb she failed to save, and she still has nightmares hearing them scream. So that's what's motivating her. It's to put an end to that, and at the end of this movie, she gets to metaphorically rescue the lamb, and that she gets to rescue the girl.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all great. And from my perspective, everybody gets a happy ending. The bad guy, Buffalo Bill's defeated. He's dead. Clarice is in the FBI. She's proven herself. And Hannibal gets to have a friend for dinner. Like, what more can you do? Gets a happy ending.
It can't be a truly happy ending. She hasn't gotten together with Hannibal yet.
Well, read the next books. Oh, God.
Robert, do you still hear the lambs?
Sometimes.
Noah, any final thoughts or anything else that you feel like we haven't covered?
Robert just reminded me I was going to bring up the score. I love the score of this movie. It's Howard Shore, one of my favorite composers. And yeah, it's very. It kind of goes back into the balance of the tonal balance of this movie, where it's kind of realistic, but it's a little heightened. And the score in this movie does get a little bit bombastic in places, but I think it fits for what the tone of the movie is and what it's trying to do. But overall, I love this movie. It's a classic for a reason. Basically, just everything we talked about. Nothing much more we can say,
So we've done this a couple of times now on Paint with Penguin and something else. Robert, guess that Rotten Tomatoes score.
This one, I imagine, at least by this point, it's got to be high. I'm gonna guess a 90%. It could be lower than that, but I'm gonna say a 90.
All right, Noah, guess that Rotten Tomatoes score.
Well, yeah, it has to be up there.
Though not all Oscar winners have high Rotten Tomatoes scores.
Right,
should be
that's the other thing. I think I'm gonna go 80. I'll go 85.
It is a 95 tomato on the critic side.
Okay.
Can I complain about one little thing? And I know Rotten Tomatoes is bullshit. This is just for fun. Yes. This has a higher Rotten Tomato score than 7. And I'm sorry, but 7 is a better movie.
You think so? Okay.
I think 7 is a better movie.
I can't say. They're both about on par for me. For me personally, this is a more.
It's like this close, but 7 has like an 88. 7 has only an 83. I feel like at the very least they should be closer.
That's fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe
They're both great movies.
just thinking about it, I think I might actually like 7 more, but
7 for
I
me
don't
is
know.
all like aesthetic and tone and the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack. That's just
Yeah,
like if there is a thriller made for me, it is that film. But this is a good one
That's
as well.
that's fair.
yeah.
Like I said,
I
for me
love
personally,
both.
this is a more rewatchable movie. But
Robert, I forgot to ask because it's been a while since we've done one of these. What is your score, sir?
oh, 5 out of 5, easy. Like this is if we ever do like a top 10 or top 25 favorite horror movies, like this is in there somewhere for me. Like that, this ranks very high, so easy 5 out of 5. And it's funny how something like 7, you're like, oh, that should have a higher score. I agree, but also stuff like Exorcist 3 has like a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I don't
Yeah,
give a fuck
it's
about
What are you
biased.
gonna do?
I know, what are you
Like I
gonna
said, none of it actually means anything. We were just having fun.
Yeah.
Noah,
Yeah,
your
but yeah, that's
score,
5 out of 5.
sir.
5 out of 5, of course.
I'm gonna be the outlier. This is a 4 out of 5. Um,
Wow, you hate this movie.
but
It's
hey,
a
2 out of 3.
different channel.
It makes our 5 out of 5
See,
list.
it still makes the
Yeah.
list. There you go.
But yeah, thanks everybody for watching. This will be up this coming Friday. Robert, thanks for picking this. Any excuse to rewatch this is always a happy one. And we will see you guys on the next one.
See ya.
Later.